How does the Tyreek Hill trade out of the Kansas City Chiefs impact the Denver Broncos standing within the side of the AFC West? We throw up the deuces to Tyreek Hill. Plus, we take a look at how the Broncos fare secondary-wise against the rest of the AFC West in terms of the receiving corps. We talk about the impact it has and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format. You can watch us here on YouTube, 4K high definition. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you receive daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Plus, once we hit 10K subscribers, if you are a subscriber to the show, you have a chance to win a free Russell Wilson jersey, courtesy of Sayre and myself. With that said, thank you so much, Broncos country, for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Sayre, the AFC West landscape continues to change this offseason, and one major domino move with Tyreek Hill being traded away from the Kansas City Chiefs to the Miami Dolphins. How does this impact the Denver Broncos? Plus, we'll also take a look at how the Broncos secondary might match up against the rest of the AFC West teams on today's episode of the show. Let's get to it, my man.
Yeah, I'm excited, Cody. I mean, this is a good day. We're throwing up the deuces all around Broncos country. I love the post that the Denver Broncos official Twitter account put out, just that picture of George Paton from when he was first hired, back in his living room in Minnesota, wherever he's at, just wearing a Broncos hat and throwing up the peace sign. Absolutely hilarious. Great work by them. And it's just a great day for, I think, every other team in the AFC West. Cody, I feel like everybody is rejoicing over this news. This is a good thing. And now we can kind of say a few things about Tyreek Hill that we didn't want to say while he was part of the Kansas City Chiefs. But now that he's on a new team, we can say all these good, nice things about his play on the field because he is a dynamic playmaker, and he's one of the best in the NFL, in my opinion. So I feel like the Chiefs, this is a huge, huge loss for a division rival.
I mean, they're trading away arguably their greatest weapon at a skill player position in franchise history. I mean, a guy that can change the dynamic of any type of game at any moment. All it takes is one play, one slant, one drag route, and his speed, he can do the rest on defense. Obviously, that's where some of the memes have come out about him throwing up the deuces to the Buffalo Bills in that shootout playout game that they had. But I think it's important to kind of look at this from the angle. How does this impact the Broncos? Sayre, at this point, look, this is one of those moves that changes, I think, the perception from the other teams in the AFC West. And I think for the Denver Broncos specifically, with the addition of Russell Wilson, with all the Broncos receivers getting together and working with Russell Wilson already, with some of the defensive moves, there is now a belief that, hey, that top spot in the AFC West is wide open. It is up for grabs. And it's not necessarily the Kansas City Chiefs as the favorite anymore. Let's just talk about Tyreek Hill for a moment. He's been a thorn in the side of the Denver Broncos for quite some time. And former Broncos cornerback Chris Harris Jr. put a tweet out yesterday saying, get this man out of the AFC West. They wanted to send him to the NFC East. Well, now he's going to the AFC East, not the NFC East. But, he is there from that standpoint. I do want to highlight, though, this is why I'm really glad that George Paton went out and got Patrick Surtain II. Because, Sayre, look, the Broncos, they lost pretty bad on the road against the Chiefs, and it had nothing to do with their defense. Their defense was ridiculously good. It was Teddy Bridgewater's multitude of interceptions that he had thrown, just the missed opportunities that they had there, not getting it on fourth down, the miscommunication. I remember that. But the bright spot was Patrick Surtain held Tyreek Hill to his career low in the NFL. 2 catches for only 22 yards on 5 targets, and PS2 obviously had an interception there. PS2 was the real deal. So that gives me now, with his departure in Kansas City, gives me a little more confidence that, hey, the Broncos match up really well against the Chiefs here. And I don't want to discount, okay, the Chiefs have McCole Hardman. They still have Travis Kelce, who the Broncos still need to find a way to try to neutralize, contain that a little bit. Don't get me wrong there. But then they also added Juju Smith-Schuster, who's a good possession receiver. But that speed dynamic, that deep ball threat speed that Tyreek Hill had is no longer part of the AFC West, which is a relief in Broncos country.
It really is. And yes, they still have Patrick Mahomes. We acknowledge that. We understand
Absolutely.
that. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is the kind of guy that I've talked about before many times, and you've all heard it, the tide that raises all the boats. He is that kind of a guy. At the same time, Tyreek Hill is a special type of playmaker on the field. There's a difference, Cody, between, like, we all know John Ross. He ran a really fast 40-yard dash, right? I mean, one of the fastest ever, if not the fastest ever at the combine. I can't remember if somebody broke it or not, but I
No.
mean, he's very, very fast. So, I mean, we know he's very fast on the track, and Tyreek Hill is fast as well on the track. But there's a huge difference between running a fast 40-yard dash and the speed at which Tyreek Hill plays the game of football. It's absolutely insane. It's like he's a Mario character running around like with a super speed or whatever. Like he's got the star or something on Mario. He's just so much faster than everything else and everyone else around him, and he plays at such a speed that makes it near impossible for you to neutralize his game. I mean, you have to keep two guys on him at all times. We saw even Sua Cravens, again, to bring his name up again because he's been tweeting quite a bit these days. He brought up the fact that, I mean, you have to keep a safety back because you don't know when Tyreek Hill is going to go deep and blow the top off your defense. So I think now that's something that the Chiefs utilize to really free up Travis Kelce underneath. And I'm not saying that's not going to be an option anymore. What I am saying is that there's a huge difference between Tyreek Hill and the way that he plays with his ability to attack the ball in the air, his strong hands, his natural playmaking ability in space, and somebody like Mecole Hardman, who by all accounts should be just as gifted, right? I mean, he's got the speed. I mean, he's got the college pedigree. He's everything, every box Mecole Hardman checks, and yet he's not as impactful as Tyreek Hill on the field. This is a huge loss. You see a lot of Kansas City Chiefs fans trying to downplay it on Twitter. I mean, this is massive in my opinion.
I see all the stages of grief happening. And look, there was a lot of Chiefs fans that when I was doing a show for Pro Football Network, we talked about this, and they were going through the different stages of grief, like the denial,
Yeah.
the acceptance, and everything like that. And I mean, it is what it is. Like it's a huge move because here's the deal. Like what you talked about with Tyreek Hill is speed commanded so much attention from defenses, which allowed those other guys to have success. But now, I mean, it even benefited when Patrick Mahomes, we know when he does all those spin moves and avoids pressure and everything like that, it's hard to cover a guy like Tyreek Hill for that long when he extends a play. So now they lose that guy, that playmaking option. And now the AFC West, the wild, wild West, is wide open. But now we're going to take a look here coming up in just a few moments, how the Broncos secondary, how they match up against the Los Angeles Chargers wide receiving core, and where Denver can really take advantage of it, especially with the new added depth inside the nickel here. We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, Broncos country, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's that time of year again as college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. It is ongoing as we speak. And from the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and information. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we get into the second half action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, taking a look at how the Broncos secondary matches up inside the AFC West against the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, just a real quick shout out to everybody in Broncos country. Mile high salute to you. Thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day for daily objective Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage that's short and bite-sized. So watching us with your morning cup of coffee, however you consume Lockdown Broncos, we are grateful for you here. Sayre, let's continue the conversation here today. Obviously, the impact of the Tyreek Hill trade in the AFC West benefits the Denver Broncos, benefits the Chargers, benefits the Raiders. We may have to have a massive show here. We may have to have an AFC West roundtable show in the future because it has been crazy, and it's been deemed by many national pundits now. The AFC West is the best overall division in football from a talent top to bottom perspective. Excited about that, but we're going to focus on the secondary here. Looking at the Broncos secondary right now against this Chargers wide receiving core, I think it's very interesting maybe how things change a little bit. Now, look, the Chargers, they just secured in free agency Mike Williams on a 3-year deal. He got a massive extension to stay there, and obviously he's been a thorn on the side of the Broncos as well from a physical playmaking wide receiver standpoint. They still have Keenan Allen on the roster. I know that they're working on that number 3 guy, trying to figure out who is it going to be. Is it going to be Jalen Guyton? It's going to be Josh Palmer. What are they going to do in free agency? Are they going to bring any of those guys back? That right there, I think, is interesting. But when I look at how the Broncos have played the last couple of years against the Chiefs. Looking at that last game of the regular season where the Broncos just got blown out on the road in LA, the secondary played really well, minus Kyle Fuller really giving up a big-time deep ball down the right sideline from the defensive right side. He's no longer part of the Denver Broncos, and ideally you don't want Kyle Fuller matched up against Mike Williams. You want a Ronald Darby or you want a Patrick Surtain II. So we know that Ronald Darby was banged up, I believe, in that game. Didn't play in that game, if I'm not mistaken. But then it's like you look at these matchups. PS2 and that first matchup where he had the pick six and he also had the interception as well, they have loaded up with talent. Like Patrick Surtain, I think, matches up really well with Keenan Allen. They had a good back and forth in both those matchups. The times he's matched up against Mike Williams had some good back and forth is there. PS2 is the type of guy you want inside the AFC West. When we look at the quarterbacks, we look at the wide receivers. Now he's going to be the primary guy that people are going to look to lock up or at least contain or limit based on what they decide to do with the scheme, these receivers in LA.
And that's exactly what I was thinking too, Cody. It feels like the Broncos have the personnel to really match up with the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, yeah, the Chargers receivers are really good, so they're going to win some of those matchups throughout the course of a game or the two games that they play against each other in the season. But man, doesn't it just sound good on paper? I mean, Patrick Surtain or Ronald Darby against Mike Williams, using their size in combination of size and speed and ball skills really to play against a guy who's primarily a vertical threat. His game has evolved a little bit over the years, but he's primarily that vertical threat for that Chargers offense. And then Keenan Allen playing in the slot and playing underneath. I think this is where obviously the new acquisition, K'Wan Williams, is going to come into play, where he's going to be a huge factor, being able to have that sort of toughness and quickness on the inside going up against the route running abilities of Keenan Allen, who is, I mean, there's very few guys in the NFL that can get the best of Keenan Allen. So, I mean, being able to really kind of limit him, maybe not necessarily shut him down, but limit him, maybe get some help on him. And this is where I think Bryce Callahan coming back would really help a lot as well, Cody. Maybe just having an extra body to keep up with Keenan Allen working out of the slot. But when he does flex outside, I think that the Broncos really have those outside positions locked in. And I think they have a good opportunity to really match up, especially as Pat Surtain. We saw how good he was as a rookie. I think he's going to even get better and better in the coming years. He's going to be just a lockdown elite corner. So I'm excited about this potential matchup being sort of in favor of the Broncos, even as good as the Chargers receivers are.
I like the point that you made there too, and it just makes me more grateful that George Paton, hey, George knew what he was doing when he decided to take Patrick Surtain. I know that there's even some people in the Chicago Bears media that said, oh yeah, look at this, the Bears are in a better position than the Broncos. Says who? Like, that is a weird narrative that we saw, that Denver gave up too much for Russell Wilson and that now the Bears, they have their franchise guy. I'm like, okay, hey, look, there's a little bit of a delusion right there. Justin Fields unproven versus Russell Wilson, who the Bears at that point actually offered more draft capital to be able to try to acquire him last season. They had a trade package prepared for that. Hey, he didn't want to go to Chicago there, guys. So, I don't know. The narratives out there that we see are interesting, but I do agree with you there. I think it would be super important for, a guy like Bryce Callahan to return, but also at the same point too, I do want to see the evolution of Michael Ojemudia. I think that if they don't bring back Bryce Callahan, we're going to see Michael Ojemudia used in a lot of different roles, whether it be the dime linebacker spot, whether it be as one of the nickel guys, because that was a position that he was learning, or whether or not, like in certain packages, you want to get unique. And let's say you want to move a PS2 inside the slot in a dime package on certain situations. You want to put Michael Ojemudia on the outside. Hey, the Broncos have the versatility to do that. And PS2 obviously will have some time to acclimate a little bit more. He is a jack of all trades at the cornerback position. And I think that right now you can make the argument when you look at where the Broncos are at. I think you can say that they have probably the better secondary in the NFL right now, top to bottom. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to take anything away from Derwin James or even J.C. Jackson at this point. That is a dynamic safety corner duo. However, when we talk about supported cast around them, slot corner is still an issue for them. The other outside corner position for the Chargers is an issue for them as well. The Chiefs have L'Jarius Sneed, who's a great addition. They have Juan Thornhill. I know they just acquired Justin Reed. They just signed him, but they have questions at the other cornerback position. They just lost Mike Hughes in free agency. So I think that when you look at it, and don't even get me started on the Las Vegas Raiders, have Trayvon Mullen, understand that they need help at the cornerback position as well. Nate Hobbs in the slot there. He had a really good season last year, but Denver right now, I mean, I don't even think you can make the argument. I think they do have the best secondary, the best defensive backfield in the entire AFC West. And I like their chances, Sayre, against the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, the next team we're going to talk about coming up here in just a few moments, I think is a little bit more of a different challenge here for this Broncos team and probably the most dynamic threat that they'll face this upcoming season. We're going to talk about the Broncos secondary against the Las Vegas Raiders wide receiving core coming up here in just a moment. But let me tell you something. If you're a Colorado sports fan, we have a Locked On podcast show for you featuring Locked On Broncos. You get us every single day, every weekday, all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. But we also have you covered with the Locked On Nuggets podcast. Adam Mares and Matt Moore do a great job breaking down all the pick and roll action about the Denver Nuggets. The ball is popping with the Locked On Nuggets podcast. Then we go to the Locked On Avalanche podcast hosted by Chris Maselli and Kyle Sullivan. They do a fantastic job bringing you all the action that you need with everything that's going on with the Avalanche on the ice. And then we have Paul Holden hosting the Locked On Rockies podcast. Baseball is back. And if you're a Colorado Rockies fan, let Paul be the guide for you the entire season for all your Locked On baseball needs. Colorado Rockies have got you covered. Locked On Rockies podcast, Colorado Sports here on the Locked On Podcast Network. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, once again, just thank you so much, Broncos country, for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We are so grateful for you. If you're a brand new viewer or listener of the show, if you've loved this podcast so far, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. And if you're a Broncos fan that's been listening for quite some time and you know people who are Broncos fans, share this podcast with them so we can continue to grow all throughout Broncos country. You guys are helping us become a powerhouse in this market. We appreciate you so much for all your Denver Broncos love and support and interaction here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. Sayre, getting into probably the most dangerous wide receiving core, maybe outside the Broncos. I mean, like I said, the AFC West is just ridiculous with wide receivers as is. But the Las Vegas Raiders, I think, will pose probably the biggest challenge to Denver this upcoming season, at least right now on paper. This is the best of the best versus the best of the best. We talk about the addition of Davante Adams. That is unbelievable for Derek Carr. Obviously, the former teammates have so much chemistry with one another. I imagine at this point, you're probably going to say, hey, Patrick Surtain, when these guys play, they're going to have to put PS2 on Adams. And there's times where I think the Raiders will use Adams inside the slot. I mean, he can be used anywhere, which makes things even scarier for this. They have Hunter Renfrow, who's unbelievable as a route runner as well, inside the slot, as a return option, as a guy you can put on the outside. Oh, let's talk about Darren Waller as well. Another guy that's just ridiculous. He's a tight end, but he doesn't play like a tight end. He can play the inline, but he's mainly a lineup on the outside guy. You can line him up in the slot. He's got the size and the speed to be a real legitimate threat. Oh, and then they have a guy like Brian Edwards on the back end, who's also a pretty darn talented wide receiver. They are loaded here in Las Vegas. I am a little anxious, not worried, but anxious about these matchups. And if Denver could stay healthy against these guys, this is pay-per-view bout style of matches between their receivers and the Broncos DBs.
It really is. I mean, it's going to be awesome to watch if you're just a general football fan, and we're going to be on pins and needles if you're a Broncos fan or a Raiders fan watching this matchup. I would say I'm high on the Broncos wide receiver group, Cody. I think we've well documented this. I love Cortland Sutton. I love Tim Patrick. I love Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. I would say for my money, especially now with Tyreek Hill out of the division, I would say that the Las Vegas Raiders have the best, most proven group at the wide receiver or skill position, the pass catching positions in terms of this specific area. These guys move the chains, I think, better than most players at their respective positions in the NFL, meaning Davante Adams, always a chain mover. Hunter Renfrow, constantly moving the chains. Darren Waller, constantly moving it, constantly just infuriating you on third down. How did these guys get open? Why is nobody covering Darren Waller? Why is it that Aaron Rodgers can target Davante Adams 1,000,000 times per game and he still finds a way on third down to make it happen? This is the group that the Broncos now have to go up against, is these absolute terrors on third down plays. So you want to get off the field against the Raiders, you better be stopping the run on the early downs and making sure that they don't have a short yardage situation, because anything 3rd and 6 and under, those guys are going to be a threat to move the chains, to convert. Barring your pass rush getting there immediately, we know Derek Carr likes to get rid of the ball. This is going to be the type of matchup where I wonder, Cody, and I don't know necessarily the right thing. I'm not a defensive coordinator, but it makes me wonder, is man coverage the best way to go against a team like the Raiders? And really just you have to kind of press them. You got to get up close to them. You got to really affect their route as much as you possibly can, just to make it a hard decision for Derek Carr, I guess. You don't want to be playing the cushion defense like we've been seeing from Vic Fangio's crew in the last few years, giving these guys a 6 to 7 yard cushion, and then all of a sudden it's a first down anyway. So to me, the Raiders have the best group of chain movers in the NFL right now with the addition of Davante Adams. Hunter Renfrow already was awesome at it. Darren Waller, we know exactly what he can do. But man, adding Davante Adams to that group, it's like you said, it doesn't make you like nervous or anything like that. That would be ridiculous. Come on, this is competition, people. But it does make you wonder, like, what are they going to do? That sort of thing.
Well, and I think you have to find balance between zone coverage and man coverage. And here's the deal. I think everything is going to be predicated, Sayre, in terms of success or failure based on pressure. If you can pressure Derek Carr, like we said, against the Broncos, he has just absolutely eaten them alive the last several years with completion percentage and big time plays. Like, that's how good of a quarterback he is against what Denver was running, even with Vic Fangio's defense. Now, obviously, the scheme will probably be a little similar there, but through the Rams' perspective, we will see some, I think, man coverage here. I don't think it's going to be the primary coverage. I think Denver's going to be a primary zone coverage team this upcoming season. However, in times where Ejiro Evero wants to dial up the blitz with 4, 5, or 6, it's hard to play man coverage. Like, if you're playing man coverage and you're sending 6, someone's going to be open. And so you have to hope and pray that pressure gets home on somebody, versus if you blitz out of zone, you have guys replacing, spot dropping. If you disguise it really well, it'll be hard for Derek Carr to be like, okay, hey, they're in zone, they're in man coverage, and then they won't understand that if you're checking out a zone, you can give different looks. That's the hard part. Derek Carr's smart too. He's very good. He understands how to pick apart zone coverage. He knows how to pick apart man coverage. I think it's about clogging some of those passing lanes a little bit and sending pressure. If you're just going to send 4 and hope and pray against this wide receiving core that you're going to have time and that you're going to be able to cover longer than 5 seconds, that is a tough ask for anybody. I don't care how good of a pro athlete you are, how elite in terms of speed, athleticism, size, and strength that you have on the secondary. It simply won't matter, because Davante Adams, let's keep in mind, there was a clinic tape this past season for him in Green Bay where they were playing the Baltimore Ravens. They played a corner on the outside leverage, playing some cover 2 underneath. They had a safety over the top, and they also had a third defender playing on the interior in case he were to go crossing pattern. That is how much of a threat he was. And we're talking about the Baltimore Ravens defense. And look, I understand throughout the season they got banged up at cornerback, but they still had Marlon Humphrey at the time. They still had a pretty solid defense against that, and he absolutely ate against triple coverage. So pressure. So I think that's going to be very critical. And man, like I said, I'm excited to see how the Broncos can get to work. And I know that for George Paton, seeing some of these moves happen, I know that he's got some plans in place, whether it be adding some guys in free agency still at this point, whether it be the NFL draft. I imagine the Broncos are going to mix and match a lot of different personnel. I'm excited to see how it translates there, but obviously the impact of the Tyreek Hill trade inside the AFC West has impact for the Broncos. It is now wide open for anybody in the AFC West to take that top spot from Kansas City. Not to say that we're going to sleep on Kansas City, but this is a huge loss for them and a huge gain for the rest of the AFC West in the arms race that we currently know right there in the wild, wild west here in the 2022 NFL season. We may have to get a entire roundtable showdown with all the hosts, Locked On Raiders, Locked On Chargers, Locked On Chiefs here. We might have an AFC West roundtable here for you here soon. I'm going to try to work on that so we can all kind of share our thoughts and maybe let teams vent, and also talk about maybe how the perspective has changed inside the AFC West. But with that said, that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Broncos podcast, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format. Also here on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news content coverage, because Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we have it covered with the best in-depth Denver Broncos news content coverage that you can get out there. We appreciate you, Broncos country. Mile high salute. Until next time, let's ride.